So hello everyone and welcome to this webinar and workshop. Hello interpreter, sorry for starting without waiting for you. We still have people coming in, so that's why we are still waiting a bit, but I think it's now, at least in my time zone, it's 3 minutes over 1, so I think we should start. So this is the Web Accessibility Directive Review Validation Workshop, and as if that isn't a long enough title for a Friday webinar, we are also celebrating the Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2022, a little post-GAAD event. Last year we had a pre-GAAD event, and this year we have a post-GAAD event. So that's how we kind of prolong the Global Accessibility Awareness Day a bit. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We have more than 400 registered participants from 49 countries all over the world: Africa, Middle East, South America, North America, of course, a lot of Europeans. So really good to see you all here. It's impressive that we reach these many people with this topic. So it's also kind of reassuring that the European policy and legislation is interesting for many people around the world. We do have live captioning today and also sign language. And please use the CC button if you would like to see the closed captionings. We will have a couple of presentations and also some interaction and then Q&A at the end. We start with describing the Web Accessibility Directive review, and we have Einars Freimanis with us today from the European Commission to set the scene and talk a little bit about the background. And then Danilo Bianchimini from Intellera, who is leading the work on the study of the review assignment, is going to give us a little bit of an overview of the tasks we have done, the assignment as such, the study and the team. And then we will present some of the main findings and also have interactive validation with all the participants. So you will have the chance to vote and also create word clouds together with us, because this is part of the study. We have been doing a lot of outreach to different stakeholders, but also we want to validate the findings together with you. So my name is Susanna Lorim. I'm the Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Funka, and I've been leading the accessibility expert piece of this study. And at the end, we have, of course, an open question and answer session, so where all of you can use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask anything, and let's hope that we can respond to it the best we can. And Einars has also promised to stay with us to 3 o'clock, so you can also post question directly to the Commission, of course. So Einars, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Okay. Where is my presentation? Sure. So, can you tell me if that works very well? Do you see the slides, Susanna? Yeah, okay, good. Well, thanks for inviting the Commission representative and me today to this workshop held as part of the 11th Global Accessibility Awareness Day, or the GAAD, which highlights digital access and inclusion for more than 1 billion people with disabilities worldwide, of whom around 100 million live in the European Union. As in the invitation said, the Web Accessibility Directive, or the WAD, is one of the most important pieces of European legislation for accessibility today. So my name is Einars Freimanis, and I'm a policy officer in the Commission service responsible for the directive. Now, before I give the context and background for today's workshop, I'd like to start by thanking the review study team from the consortium composed of Intellera Consulting, Open Evidence, and of course Funka, for their tremendous work for over almost 1.5 years that now approaches the finishing line. So today, I will briefly sketch from the Commission's perspective the context of the review on the directive, where are we today in this process, what the review is, and what happens next. Next, okay, that was my topics. Okay, the context When the Commission was adopted, when the directive was adopted by the Parliament and the Council in 2016, European lawmakers decided that the Commission shall carry out a review of the application of this directive by June 2022. The Member States on their end had to transpose the directive into national law by September 2018, and these national laws had to be practically applied from 2019. Now, the review covers the first 3 years of the directive's practical application, so from 2018 to 2021. And where are we here today in this process? So in this workshop, we are going to discuss one of the last steps, the outcome of the study by the contractors that feeds into the formal EC evaluation report. Now, on the timeline that I'm sharing on the screen, the green dots refer to the milestones in the directive, and the yellow dots, milestones, sort of the general ones in the review process. Today is one of the last steps in this process that started in 2020 with a consultation on the evaluation roadmap, following a 14-week public consultation last summer, and targeted surveys in autumn, 39 in-depth interviews. Probably many of you who took part in those interviews are here today. Monitoring reports by member states, desk research, and many other activities up until recently. Now, the Commission has now published the full results of the public consultation, including the easy-to-read survey, results with the raw data and contributions from the stakeholders. You'll have a link to those results at the end of the presentation. Before we go into sort of the nitty-gritty, I just wanted to share in a couple words what a review is. The directive calls for a review of the law. The Commission's PEF regulation guidelines say that review is actually an evaluation, and forgive me here for the guide to EU legal speak. An evaluation is different from impact assessment or revision of the law, both of which precede changes in the law. So better regulation is really about ensuring that European legislation achieves its objectives while being targeted, effective, easy to comply with, and with the least burden possible. So to do this, the Commission uses various instruments, such as evaluation or the review as per the terminology in the directive. Now, evaluation assesses past performance of existing policies and legislation. Evaluation aims to help the Commission learn about how EU measures can work in practice and assess their performance against initial expectations. By evaluating or reviewing, the Commission takes a critical look at whether EU legislation is fit for purpose and delivers on the intended objectives. Evaluation is also providing a key opportunity to engage with a wide variety of stakeholders and the public in general. While an evaluation is factual, it actually goes beyond an assessment of what has happened. It also considers why it happened, and if possible, how much has changed. It looks at the wider perspective and provides an independent and objective judgment of the situation on the basis of evidence available. Now, this work is often carried out with the help of external and expert contractors experienced in conducting EU-wide evidence gathering, such as our study team composed of experienced professionals from Funka, Intara, and Open Evidence. Now, at the end of this process, at the end of evaluation, we will have two main products from the work conducted by the external contractors. First, a long and detailed study report, which goes beyond the mere evaluation questions. This study will be published with an executive summary in English, French, and German in EU Bookshop, like all EU studies are published there. And second, a formal evaluation report, the review that will be adopted by the Commission in the form of a staff working document. And this is going to be published on Eurolex, the European Union legislation portal. Now, both texts will be publicly available both to policymakers, thus helping to inform their decision-making, and to all stakeholders and the public. Now, the formal evaluation report is a key document that informs the stakeholders and policymakers of the outcome of the evaluation, presenting the judgments and lessons learned. The report tells the story of what has been achieved with a particular EU intervention and how it was achieved or not in a narrative form. It can provide an indirect feedback mechanism acknowledging the contributions from everyone. And speaking about the conclusions, they are written in such a way that policymakers can use them as basis for future policy development, but respecting the limits of this staff working document. For example, the evaluation report may not make any commitment for future action or direction of action. It will present the lessons learned and include a systematic screening of the evidence, indicating which findings match expectations, which findings are too early to allow any conclusions to be drawn, sort of wait and see, and what does not work. In our case, the evaluation was aimed to allow the results of the monitoring and reporting exercise carried out by the member states also to be taken into account. Now, I'm going to go to the last slide. What happens next? Well, after today, the next step will be to approve and publish the final study report supporting the review. It will in turn feed into the aforementioned evaluation report / staff working document that undergoes a more formal approval and adoption by the Commission. Now, this process will take some time, not too long, for formal internal validation steps. We are, after all, a bureaucracy. Now, once approved, the report will be published on the Eurolex for everyone to access it there. And we're also proud that we will have a short, easy to read versions for some of the texts. Now, this is enough about the formalities, as everyone, I think, is eager to hear from the study team. What are the main highlights? What are the lessons learned? And what are the conclusions of this work? With that, I will end by wishing us all a fruitful and insightful workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Einars, for sharing this with us and setting the scene for this. So now I'll just steal the screen sharing from you. And I hope I'm now sharing the study team. So Danilo, please, this part is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. My name is Danilo Bianchini. I am the project manager in Layer Consulting, and we are leading this assignment. I will start by very quickly giving you an overview of the team that has worked on this assignment. There was a mix of expertise that was mobilized. On the one hand, Intellair and Open Evidence, as well as PwC, that are working and worked on policy, public policy analysis and evaluation, and have also experience in working with DG Connect, and together with Funka, that has very in-depth expertise both in web accessibility and working in these matters at national and European level in particular. They have managed and worked on several assignments. So this was the team that has worked for the last year and a half almost on the assignment. But let's move to the main tasks of the assignment. So if we move to the next slide. So what were the main tasks and objectives of the assignment? As highlighted already by Einars, on the one hand, we had to review the application of the Web Accessibility Directive and assess to what extent this Web Accessibility Directive, but also its related implementing acts, achieved the overall objectives and the specific objectives defined in the directive that you will find inside this piece of legislation. We were then mapping relevant technological advances because, as written in the legislation, the legislations envisages some exclusions regarding some type of content, and was that should have been reconsidered in light of technological advances. So we have started by doing an initial mapping of those, and we also then we draw conclusions and lessons learned and recommendations for the next steps. So what should be done at EU level as a result of this evidence-based analysis that we have carried out. If we move to the next slide, we can look at the different data collection activities and methods that have been conducted and carried out for this assignment. So one of a key element has been the open public consultation, as also highlighted by Einars. That was really a bit guiding a lot of the data collection activities that have followed. After this, we had some secondary data collection activities, which included the literature review and the monitoring reports that were provided for the first time in December 2021 by the different national from the national authorities. So we included and incorporated the main findings, so an initial analysis of these reports. So this informed basically the analysis and the review of this directive. And we also conducted 4 targeted surveys for stakeholders, so which included the monitoring bodies, the industry representatives, persons with disabilities of care or carers, and public sector bodies, to gather additional inputs from them on specific matters that were really particularly relevant for the specific stakeholder category. We then conducted a data gap filling activity to collect and reinforce the evidence that was collected through all these data collection activities through a number of interviews, so with national authorities and also with technological experts. So this was the whole data collection activities that was carried out for this assignment. Today, what we're trying to do is what we will be doing. It's not trying. We will be doing is showing you and presenting you the main findings in order to validate this in a workshop. And this is the workshop for the so-called validation workshop. So these have been the activities that we have carried out as part of this assignment. And Susanna, I'm leaving you the floor.
Okay, thank you, Danilo. So let's move on with the real thing. Both Danilo and Einars, please stay on because we need you for. Of course, you can already start asking your questions now, but we will collect them to the in the end. So the main findings that we have collected so far, or in this report, and also actually reported to the Commission, are, I mean, the report is 225 pages or something like that. So this will be just a breakout of some of the things, but I've tried to make a compilation of the main findings. So based on the 5 kind of research questions we have asked, we have looked into the effectiveness of the directive, and the highlights or the main findings here are like this. So the monitoring is kind of working well, and the most important thing from my perspective is that it's also well received. Public sector bodies who are monitored are generally very positive about this. It's seem to help, and we don't get a much pushback from the public sector bodies. Of course, it differs between countries and between public sector bodies, but the general overall impression when we talk to the monitoring agencies is that people are actually happy to be monitored. And this, I think, to me, this is something that is really rewarding to know. This means that kind of the tools here in the directive are working, and that we have a chance to improve things. The monitoring activities are leading to increased awareness. And this is both at public sector body and also in the industry. And there's also an increased demand, of course, for accessibility expertise and for solutions and tools that support the public sector bodies in accessibility. So this directive is not only trying to make sure that the public sector body websites and apps are accessible, but it also has to do with the inner market and how the market works. So anything we can show that it also is increasing demand, I think, is a really good thing and important also for the directive. That said, we still haven't found many accessible websites. And of course, you can always say that not all websites have been monitored, and there's just a proportion of this, and some of them are only monitored with a simplified method. So we can't really know. And of course, I'm sure there are really good examples out there, but at a general basis, there's very little evidence of websites being accessible at this point. But it's also very early. I mean, I'm not happy with this result, but it is early and it is moving in the right direction. We have also looked at the user involvement piece, and I'll get back to that a little later with some numbers, but at a general level, it actually, we have seen results from or proof that users have been much more involved than what at least I have thought when we have talking to end users. Not to have been that, we have heard a lot about them not feeling that they have been involved, but quite a lot of good work is being made in the majority of the member states, not only when it comes to the selection of websites and apps being monitored, but also in expertise and in user testing and so on. But I'll get back with more details on that. So it's a little bit, it varies a lot, and of course it can be improved, but still users have been involved. When it comes to the feedback mechanism, one of my favorite pieces of this legislation, because I think it's so important that the end users have the right to provide feedback. And I really think that constructive feedback from end users can help public sector bodies in making sure that their websites are accessible. This has not been used at all as much as it is foreseen, or which would be required to make this efficient. But I think personally that it is because the monitoring agencies and the public sector bodies, they have been now in the kind of beginning of this process very focused on the compliance piece and the monitoring piece. So I hope and think that this will become better in the near future. But until now, we see very little proof of the feedback mechanism in action, so to speak. When it comes to efficiency, it's clear that all the stakeholders believe that the benefits of the directive outweighs the costs, so that's positive. And actually, there has been it's not much talk about costs. It was before the directive entered into force and during the transposition. We had a lot of pushback from the member states saying that this would be really difficult and really expensive, but it doesn't seem to be the case in reality, which is of course also very rewarding. The disproportionate burden clause of this directive is very rarely used. We don't see much evidence of that at all. So the public sector bodies and the monitoring agencies, they don't say to make something accessible, but rather it's a lack of resource of time or expertise, or that they don't know what is not accessible and so on. There are many other reasons, but the money doesn't seem to be the main reason for this. And we have in the report a little bit of kind of range numbers on what the monitoring has costed in the member states. Some of that is kind of confidential, so we don't have the price list of all the member states. But what I think is most important, or would be more important to look into, is what the actual cost of making websites accessible. That is something that wasn't part of this study, but would be really interesting to have a look at and to measure if that price goes down, because that is what you would presume when expertise becomes more widely spread and also the demand is rising. So when it comes to relevance, we have looked at whether the directive is still relevant for end user and different stakeholders, and the answer is yes. This is still fitting and suitable for both the national policy measures and also the EU level ones, and of course it's still relevant for end users. We have also looked into the emerging technologies, so both how new technology or technological development can support the requirements already in the directive, and potentially also how the new development of new technologies and solution could in the future maybe widen the scope or add new requirements if it's possible to do things more accessible in the future, or maybe even now. That could be kind of an input to the Commission to look into if the requirements should be broadened or widened or changed in one way or another. So that's also a piece of this report, has to do with what we have seen in the market and what the market players are adding to this. And this could of course be assistive technology. It could be how solutions and tools to make the websites and apps better, and also validating tools, testing tools, and that sort of thing. So we have looked at the emerging technologies from a broad perspective, trying to cover many things that are happening on the market. And of course, the directive is still relevant for end users because, surprise, the web is not perfect yet. So there's still things to do, and the directive still needs to be in place probably for quite a long time before it won't be relevant more. We also see an increase in digitalization as a whole, and also the number of people with disabilities who use the internet has increased, and the number of people who are using it regularly is also increasing. So you can say that the directive is even more relevant now because more people are dependent on, or at least using, internet and services from public sector websites. So, and of course, if you are providing services digitally and you only get a proportion of the population to use them, then they will be not as efficient, and it will cost more money per person using the service, so to speak. So still very relevant, this directive. When it comes to coherence, we have looked at different policy measures and also national legislation, and done quite a lot of interviews around this. And of course, the directive is still very coherent with the UNCRPD. It is supporting the UNCRPD, and it's also very much in line with what the European Commission is doing at the strategic level. So the strategy for the rights of persons with disability, the directive is fitting very clearly with what the strategy aims to do. So there's no problem there. And when it comes to the national legislation, we have found a couple of overlaps. For example, when it comes to national legislation on how to handle archives, where there are overlaps between the directive and the national laws, but there is no real conflict. It's rare that this creates any problem, or at least not any problem that can't be solved. So all in all, it seems to be in a good position here. The last research question is really about the EU added value. So each of the member states could, of course, have created their own laws on accessibility, and a handful of them already had national legislation on web accessibility before the directive entered into force. And the question is, does it make sense to do this at EU level, and does it have an added value? Is it beneficial to do this at the EU, kind of a common EU legislation, instead of doing it separately in each member state? And the answer has been generally yes, it has an added value to do this at the EU level. So first of all, of course, the harmonized requirements, that we now have the same standard and the same minimum requirements in all member states, that does make sense, both from end user perspective, also from public sector perspective, and the market perspective. So all stakeholders are very in agreement here that it does have an added value to do this at the EU level. And also, it doesn't really matter if we look at the countries who have created new legislation, or if they have updated existing legislation on web accessibility. They still say that it does have an added value to do this at the EU level. And some member states also claim that this would never have happened in their country. So they're very kind of thankful and grateful for the Commission for doing this, or for the EU to make this happen, because it really it pushed accessibility in a way that they don't see they can't see that would have happened at the national level. So for political reasons and other reasons. There are also a little bit of a difference between how you look at the weight of the EU. So some member states say that it's good that it comes from the EU, because then that has a stronger push or power when it comes to the EU. Some member states is a little bit the other way around, because you don't want someone coming from above and telling you what to do. So that has been a little bit different, but all in all, very positive that this is an EU initiative. From the market perspective, we do see a little bit of cross-border sales. The industry is generally very positive, and they see a lot of potential and opportunity to sell across all member states without having to make sure that you follow the regulations here and there, but when everything is harmonized, it's much easier. But really, this hasn't started happening yet, so we can't prove it with numbers and statistics, but everyone we have talked to believe this will happen. But again, it's very early stages. So, and this all, it's interesting with the timeline Einar's talked about, because the review is really happening. I mean, we started with the review before the monitoring reporting has started. So it's really, we are kind of reviewing it on the go and at the same time as it happens. So I think if you are kind of disappointed with the results, then keep that in mind, because I think the next time something like this will be presented, a lot more will have happened for sure. So that's kind of the research question high level. And we are going to take some examples from the study. But before we do that, we would like to know who we are talking to, because this is a validation workshop where we are presenting findings and then asking you what you think, so that we kind of validate the results from our side. And that is why we are really interested in what the audience look like. So if Eva could publish the first poll, we are going to ask you who you are. So this is also an exercise in showing that you know how to vote in the polls. And I think that is going quickly, so everyone knows how to do this. So we are asking who you are or where you're from. I am participating today as public sector body, disabled persons organization, another NGO, so non-governmental organizations that are something else. We have the industry like the generalist ICT companies, we have accessibility expert companies, or other private sector, commercial sector, and then just other. So something we haven't explained. We have many other stakeholders that we have been talking to, like standardization organization, researchers, and so on. So there's a long list, and policymakers, other policymakers. So there's a long list of potential stakeholders here, but we try to show the ones that we believe are most likely to be in the audience today. So people are still voting, so let's see. Wait a while before we close this. Okay, so now I think it looks like we have a stable result. Thank you. So what we can see is we have 32% from the public sector, 6% from DPOs, 7% other NGOs, 3% ICT companies, 23% accessibility experts, 6% other private sector, 14% university research, and 9% other. So I can't remember from the top of my head really how this was done in the, Danilo, do you remember how the spread was in the OPC? Either Danilo doesn't know, or he doesn't.
Can you, sorry, I was muted. We had a lot of also citizens that were, there was a good share of citizens that also participated to the OPC, but and public sector bodies were the two main categories. But yes, this is one of the category that I can see maybe is less represented here, but we have NGOs and DPOs as well. So.
Yeah, so I think this is a little different. Also, we have, I believe, more accessibility experts in this in the room today than we had in the stakeholder consultation. So citizens, absolutely, they were many more, and that is something I think we should always remind people about, that we had more than 60% of the people who responded to the open public consultation were using the easy to read version. And I believe this was the first time the Commission had an open public consultation in easy to read. So please correct me if I'm wrong.
Exactly.
I think it's, which we are of course very happy about, because it's also a good example of how to use accessibility to get more people involved. So we will have to keep this in mind when we do the maths of the results of this validation workshop, that we have a slightly different setup of stakeholders, but I know that is no result because we have the numbers crunchers in Open Evidence in Intilera to help us do the statistics in a perfect way. So thank you everyone for responding to that. That is a good piece of information. And let's move on with some of the main findings then. So when it comes to the accessibility statement, we found that 21% out of the member states, and now I should say that we don't have responses from all member states. Not all member states have reported yet, despite that they should have done that. And some of them, we don't have the specific result from that specific member state. So it will not always be the same number that I show on this. If you think that I can't calculate and I don't know how many member states there are, that's not the case. So these numbers are sometimes a little bit different, but 21 member states, they do check that the websites have an accessibility statement when they do the monitoring. But only 5 of the member states actually validate that the content of the accessibility statement is coherent with the result of, or is the same as the result of the monitoring. So there's no kind of quality check here. And it's not required to do this in the monitoring methodology, but they do have to, according to the Implementation Acts, the monitoring agencies are, the accessibility statement, the page with the accessibility statement is supposed to be part of the selected pages that you that you monitor. So this is a little bit a pity that not all of them do. And we do believe that it would be a good idea to also add this validation piece to the checking of the accessibility statements in future monitoring. When it comes to the compliance status, there are also quite a lot of differences between the member states. So 18 of the member states use the compliance status that is required according to the Implementation Act. So there is a way of reporting on compliance status that is required according to the directive, but only 18 use that. And 8 of the member states have either they don't report on the compliance status, or they have created another way of doing this. And this is, of course, makes it also difficult to compare. So we are really comparing apples and pears if we try to see if one member state is more accessible than the other. So this is something that I believe also should be addressed in the future. When it comes to transparency, it's more of a 50-50. So 12 member states do publish the results of the monitoring, and 12 do not publish results. They only communicate directly with the public sector body that they have monitored, so no one else gets to know the result of that monitoring. And at the time of the interviews, 2 member states did not share the results even with the public sector body that they had monitored, but that will of course happen, and it was based on resources and so on. But and again, this is not something that the directive requires, but according to our experience, it would be good to share as much as possible. We think transparency is important, and also many of the other public sector bodies could potentially learn from reading about other sections like this. So, and then another kind of interesting piece here is, of course, that this directive is a minimum harmonization directive, which means that the member states cannot do less than the directive requires, but they can go beyond the minimum requirements. And that is what is also happening in some of the member states. And also when it comes to the monitoring, they do more than they are required to do. So we have member states checking plain language. We have member states checking also for sign language, if that is existing in the public sector websites and apps. We have some member states who have extended the scope of the directive to cover parts of the private sector. And there is an opt-out possibility for the member states to say that we do not cover kindergartens and schools, and around half of the member states, they do cover kindergartens and schools and nurseries, and half of them do not. And then we also have examples of live video being checked in the monitoring. So if the live video is accessible or not. And some member states have also checked specifically on documents and how accessible they are. And then we have member states who also cover parts of third-party content. So not only things that the public sector body is creating or developing on funding themselves, but also like social media, for example. So the member states are quite ambitious. It differs, of course, between different parts of Europe, but all of them are doing a really good job and trying to kind of use the directive in their own way and their tradition and what.
Eva, maybe we can launch the poll, the next poll,
the second one,
and we'll see if we can get Susanna back online.
Yep. Yes, so I'm launching the second poll. John, would you like to read aloud the question, maybe answers?
Yeah, so now we're asking all of the participants, what are the main drivers to improve accessibility in your country? So the poll should have popped up on your screen, so we look forward to hearing from you. Just give you some seconds to fill that out. And meanwhile, we'll just wait for Susanna just to come back in. I think she's joined us now. So, Susanna, we're just doing the poll. The poll's been launched. So once it's finished, we can look at the answers.
Perfect. Thank you, John. So I think most of the participants have voted. So what are the main drivers to improve accessibility in your country? We have, am I sharing the results?
Yes, I think so. Could someone from the attendees
Yes.
confirm? Yes, great, thank you.
So 64% says that the directive as such is the main driver. 22% votes for monitoring, 90% training, 44% awareness raising, 9% penalties, 31% end user involvement, and 9% don't know what the main drivers would be in their country. So Danilo, Einars, do you have any comments on this? Anything you think is striking or surprising? Seems like we are moving in the same direction, all of us, but
Exactly. This is what I was seeing. It seems in line with also what we have collected. I don't know, Einars, if you want to add something on this.
Yeah, I think the percentages and distributions are, I'm surprised to see penalties. That didn't come up very much in public consultations or in the member state reports. But I guess this is also because we have more global audience here, different approaches across the pond, I would say. So let's say private enforcement / penalties. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe you're right. And sometimes when we talk to end users, that's when the penalties often comes up, I think. So I also think it's a bit surprising, but yes, definitely it must be the geographical spread of this audience, I would say also. But I guess that's one question for the Commission. I mean, do you think that penalties would be a way forward in Europe? I mean, the Accessibility Act is acting a little bit different than the directive in this respect. Do you have any comments on that, kind of general, without promising anything?
Yeah, without promising, I could say so. The way we see, or at least personally, how European law is being drafted, especially directives, so unlike regulations, that member states have to implement. Now, enforcement very often, and like in this one, it's left up to the member states. The directive says you have to have effective enforcement procedures, And this is, I guess the member states want to agree, you know, they say, okay, this is our domestic problem, how are we going to do? I think we have 7 member states in the EU that have penalties for violating the rules of the directive. France, Slovenia, a couple other ones, you know, ranging from 5, 6, 10,000 euros per breach up to 250,000 in France, you know, depends. But it's really national order. EU member states, they don't really want sort of to give this power to the Commission or to the lawmakers, you know, to set down penalties. At least not yet in this sector. You know, we start with the minimum harmonization. The bigger part here, what I thought that works well to enforce and bring about changes in the market is the monitoring. It kind of really works hand in hand with the enforcement and end user involvement, because it's sort of trying to fix the problem without really penalizing somebody. Sort of fix the problem up front so that you have an accessible web and accessible mobile phones, instead of going and, you know, finger pointing and chasing the problem after it has happened. Yeah, at least that's the choice that's been taken in the directive. Now, how the future will work, or with the Accessibility Act, which does spread out to the private sector, then the choices are often different. You know, here we have a law that obliges the public sector itself, you know, and who pays the fine? It comes from the taxpayer's pocket anyway. So,
yeah, that's exactly my argument. Who is paying? So, but it's a question that comes up all the time. So it was just good to hear the kind of the perspective from the Commission. So thank you. Daniela, did you want to comment on this as well? Or?
No, I think that Einars was gave a very good answer. So that's okay. As we said, it might be that penalties came up because of the widespread of the audience, but it's an interesting it is an interesting point, even if the European Commission is taking a slightly different approach, which is one of the approaches that maybe not everyone knows, but in the European legislation framework is something like monitoring and enforcement is more followed rather than penalties, due also to the specificities of our, let's say, different countries and so on. So this could be one of the reasons also.
And I think this came in our earlier workshop. I think at this stage, and we have a very young or new legislation, the prudent thing is better to invest in building, creating accessible web and mobile apps rather than penalize. You know, what are you going to do with, you know, with the penalties or with the fines collected? And there's a difference. So yeah, it's not like sort of infringing the customs rules, importing sort of faulty products. There, the public sector, or let's say the governments, are much more willing to put penalties on that because it's consumer safety and so on. And we're a little bit a different sort of power balance here. It's public sector committing themselves to do something good for the general public. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think also the monitoring reports have been used across the globe in a very interesting way. And I really like that they're public. And I know that in Canada, for example, they are using the example of Luxembourg, which is a very kind of clear and neat report in French. And they say if Luxembourg, which is a super small country, if they can do this, why can't Canada? We have also had legislation for a long time. Why can't we do monitoring? Why? So it's kind of, it goes both ways. I think in North America, they say penalties are working. Why don't you use penalties? But we can also say, hey, monitoring is working. Why don't you? So I just see that we can pick and choose and really learn from each other and share experiences. That I think that is what brings accessibility forward in many ways. So I think we have reached the time where there is time for a little coffee. So my time is 6 minutes to 2 in Denmark, where I am right now. So I say we have a 6-minute break, if that can be done in a good way, so that we meet again at 2 o'clock Central European Summertime. And then we will go on with some more interactions and more polls and word clouds, and also some more, a little bit more detailed information about the findings from the study. So see you in 5 minutes. So welcome back. It's now 2 o'clock here in Central Europe, at least. So I do see some questions in the chat. So please, if you would like to address one of the speakers, then do use the Q&A function. That is much easier for us than also following the back and forth in the chat. So please use the Q&A function, and we will respond to the questions, as many questions as we have time for at the end of the session. So let's move on to the lessons learned. And this is, again, of course, just examples. So generally, the member states have reported that there's a problem with lack of expertise. And we have had different, as Danilo mentioned before, we have reached out to stakeholders in many different ways. We have had the open public consultation, we have had in-depth interviews, and we have targeted surveys as well. And we have got a little bit of different results in the different channels, depending on, of course, the number of stakeholders and the proportion of different stakeholders and so on. But if we look at the open public consultation, where we have kind of all stakeholders together, the lack of expertise comes up as a problem or a challenge in different ways. So in public sector, 57% claim that there's a lack of awareness in public sector, which is, of course, not good if you are supposed to be accessible and you don't really know about the need for accessibility or the fact that there is a directive around, then that it won't happen. And 70% say that there's a lack of expertise among the professionals in public sector. And among the market players in the open public consultation, again, 50% say that suppliers do not have enough expertise or do not have the required expertise when developing and designing websites. And for the suppliers of apps, the same number is 40%. But again, when we do interviews with the monitoring agencies in the member states, then almost everyone say that lack of expertise, both in the public sector bodies themselves and in the market, maybe specifically in the market, is one of the biggest challenges here. So one of the big objectives of the directive is really to make sure that the market is growing, not only the cross-border sales, but the market as such, so that we get more experts around, and then it will, of course, be cheaper and easier to make things accessible. But we don't really see that happening yet. A vast majority of the monitoring agencies we have been talking to say that they foresee this happening, and some of them also see a little bit of an increase in the number of companies around, and we see that ourselves, that they're new companies are created and new experts are coming, and we see more people being certified and so on. So I do personally think that if you are in the market, you do see this increase, but it doesn't move fast enough for the monitoring agencies and the public sector to really leverage on this market situation. So the lack of expertise seems to be kind of crucial here. And of course, when you move from kind of soft recommendations and accessibility is more of a nice to have, and then to very strict regulations in a fairly short period of time, it takes a little bit of time for the market to adjust. So I think this is one of the points we would like to ask, again, our audience, what do you think we can do to make sure that we kind of bridge the gap here and create more knowledge, competence, and experience in accessibility? So if we could please show the poll again. Thank you, Eva. The next question for the audience is, what can be done to raise accessibility knowledge and skills? And we'll just wait a while for everyone to participate in this little poll. So we have training of public sector, training of ICT industry, and to train the next generation, which is to have web accessibility included in curricula and university and other higher education, certification, one thing, best practice sharing, and so on. There are, of course, other alternatives as well. And if you would like to share anything that you don't find in the poll, then please just write it in the chat, so we can have more ideas as well. But these are some of the some of the results that we have got that we need to validate. So. So now it seems like we have good proportion of the participants have already responded. As soon as I think I'm going to end the poll, then I think people start adding more results. So, yeah, so I think we'll stop here and share the results. So what we have here is the responses to what can be done to raise accessibility knowledge and skills. 68% say that training of public sector officials would be required, 64%, so more or less the same, of training in ICT industry professionals. 76% says that we should try to add or include web accessibility training in the university curricula. 45% says certification of professionals would be important, 61% just best practice sharing, and 13% say other. So let's see if we have any interesting other in the chat. So training of actual users, that's also important, of course. That's really really an important suggestion, I think, and also accessibility in tools. Yeah, so built-in accessibility from the start, absolutely, I agree with that. And then positive visibility for accessibility or accessible and highly usable solutions. So an event, yeah, kind of champion ambassadors, good idea as well. So, and the legislation could guide this. It should be easy, should be made, yeah, so requirements should not be a need for special knowledge or having to remember things. So I think that is also kind of including it in procurement already requirements, and also kind of technically include it by default in content management systems and things like that. So Einar, Danilo, do you want to comment on anything or the results of this?
The two main, this is Danilo speaking, the two main things that we also identified were like professional certification, that I see here is not at the top, but is 45%, reached 45%. So it is a bit in line with what we have. We thought it could have been beneficial. We also focused on capacity building activities. And I think that here the need of training in general, both for public sector, but also for the private sector, is clearly emerges. So.
Yeah, Einar?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I would add to this, investment. So more investment is needed for all of these, training the people, building better products. So you can see, I'm also reading the chat, there are a lot of great ideas, and many, I think with Wilco started with, better tools, from the industry, so that you don't need to be, an average content creator doesn't have to know all the ins and outs. But sort of we are getting there as content moves more and more digital, and we've seen this during the pandemic. But basically, if money comes, and scientists, experts, industrialists, the tools follow. And the reason I'm mentioning this, so the demand is on the rise, sort of thanks to this public sector move, but also now is this period where the recovery and resilience funding is being adopted, and so I think it was 20% of that should go in digital, and we're talking about billions. And what we try to do in the Commission, that's not part of the directive, but encourage member states, use that money that's available now, and also from the structural funds, to invest in accessibility in your countries. Develop the sort of grassroots, have more companies servicing you, have more expertise. And here we're talking about the social, employment, training, give people with disabilities a chance to become testers, have courses for them. Sort of money is not the problem, but sort of investing in developments will surely bring the results that we expect, and we hope that this will be triggered by increased demand from the public, you know, that everybody starts moving around. And originally, that was the intention of the directive. You know, can the public sector be one of the first movers, sort of, to start this better accessibility for everyone? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and I really believe that if when the public sector, specifically maybe the procurers, when they know how to require accessibility when they buy things, that will trigger the market, and then the investments will come. So I really think that this the directive can be more effective than it may look, because people say it's only the public sector, so it's not that important. But I really believe that it will grow out from that, and because the public sector in Europe has such a huge purchasing power, I really think it's going to make a bigger difference than just the public sector, whatever that is. But again, it's the early days, so I think the next time we do this exercise, I think we will see something else, or I hope so at least. So, but very good information also in the chat. I just can't read and speak at the same time all the time, but really good things, and we will save everything, of course, and use in the last pieces of work we do. So the next result here is the requirements tested. So, and this is something we come back to. So the European legislation and specifically this directive points to an EN standard, and it's the EN 301-549. And although that is the requirements, that is not really what has been always monitored in all the member states. So what we have found is that only 5 of the member states have done a full EN 301-549 Annex A monitoring, which is what every member state should have done, because these are the requirements. 4 of them have selected parts of Annex A, so kind of good pieces, but not everything. 11 member states only test for WCAG criteria, which is not enough to test for compliance to this legislation. And 5 have done even less. So 5 member states have only picked success criteria from the web content accessibility guidelines. And this is, of course, again, makes it really difficult to compare. But also the intention of the legislation is, of course, that the minimum requirements should be the same across the board. And when this is not monitored that way, that becomes a problem. And there are different reasons for this. For the member states who do not actually monitor what they're supposed to monitor, it has to do with competence again. Some claim that that the experts they have hired or the suppliers they have to carry out the monitoring, they don't know the EN standard. And it can also be that they use tools that don't cover the standard as a whole. And there are also other reasons for this, of course. But this is, of course, something that needs to be addressed in one way or another. So I think we have another question around this, if we can publish this poll as well. So, yes. So what accessibility requirements are you, the audience, or the suppliers or experts that you hire, familiar with? So what are you using? This could be interesting. And of course, again, we need to make sure that we take into account that this audience is broader than just the EU, but it's still interesting just to see how this market looks like. And I would really love for the people who choose other standards here, if you could please provide those or example of those standards that you are familiar with, if these are not the WCAG 2.1 or EN 301-549. If you have examples of other standards, that would be really, really helpful if you would like to share that with us in the chat. So I think we can close this. No, it's still moving. So we have a very active audience, so almost everyone is voting. It's good to see. So if I end this now and share with you the results, this is what it looks like. So 81% of our audience today is familiar with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and 31% is familiar with the EN 301-549. So of course, because we have an international audience, these numbers are more striking than I hope it would have been if it was only a European audience, but still we have seen in Europe as well that this is actually, it is a problem that the EN is not as widely known as the WCAG. Then we have 17% other standards and 14% say I'm not familiar with any of the standards. And that may of course be because the audience are more interested, general public, or interested in accessibility, but not really working with standards. So that number doesn't have to mean anything from a monitoring and compliance standpoint, but I think the fact that WCAG is so much more known also kind of validates what we have seen in the study as well. So I don't know if Danilo or Einars wants to say something. I don't know how much we can dwell on this one, but
yes, as you know, I'm not the expert in the standards, but this is what we can say is that in general we have seen also in the report, as you rightly pointed out, some challenges in let's say challenges, but in this area, from room for improvement, I would say, and this will also be very important to improve the monitoring exercise that is done at European level. So I think that the work that has started with this directive, and we hope that it will improve with over time and will make all these exercises more and more comparable, and they can be very effective if we manage to compare them, because the analysis can be much stronger and we can really have a greater impact. So I think it's a process that started. So I don't know, Einars, if you want to add on this.
No, thanks. I would just mention from the sort of policy-making commission perspective, it's important to have a standard. And the good news is that the work is constantly evolving and developing. And we saw, from when the directive was drafted, we had sort of version 1.1 of the EN, sort of using something for ICT products and services, and that really developed for websites and mobile apps. The second good thing is that it's aligned with WCAG and follows that development. And third thing, I think, is because it helps sort of do, how do you make things accessible? The law requires what, and the standards help you do how. Is the upcoming changes in the future with the European Accessibility Act that will apply to, no matter who, private, public sector, who sell products or offer services. So we will see the development on the standard continuous much more than the legislation being changed. So I think this is to make sure that the standard is there, that it's good and it's understandable, it's constantly improved.
Yeah, I agree. And there are interesting times ahead of us as the standardization request for the Accessibility Act is still evolving. But when it becomes public, I think that will also show that standards really are evolving, and that we can move with not as fast as technology evolves, but still, I think it's a great, it's really important that we have the technical specifications in standards and not in the law. I think that is really an important piece of the potential success of European legislation work. So I agree. So let's move on to the next one. That is the feedback mechanism. Again, we already talked about that. This is in the monitoring reports. This is mostly not reported. It's also not required. So this is not something that member states do wrong. But in the Implementation Act, they don't have to report on feedback, because the feedback that we talk about here is the feedback mechanism, and that is feedback between the end user and the public sector body. So you have the right as an end user to let the public sector body know if something is not accessible to you. And that is not measured or monitored by the monitoring agencies. And of course, it may be that there's a lot of feedback going on between end users and public sector bodies that the monitoring agencies don't know about. So that's why they are not reporting on it. But we do ask, of course, about this, and many of the monitoring agencies, they do have a lot of connection and communication with public sector bodies when they report on their monitoring results and so on. So they do discuss this, and in quite a few of the member states, they have also tried to investigate this. And the result is that it's very scarce. So also the evidence, most of the member states, they don't know much about whether there is feedback or not. But the ones who do know, they say that feedback is very rarely used. And that is also validated by other investigations and studies on end user behavior when it comes to the feedback mechanism. So this is kind of, the same results that we get from different places. And also when we ask users in the open public consultation, the users mainly say that yes, they know about the feedback mechanism. And I would say that those end users responding to the open public consultation may be more than average interested in accessibility and maybe more than average knowledgeable about policy and things like that. So maybe that's not kind of a perfect statistically validated result, but still in the open public consultation, the user said, yes, we do know about it, but do you use it? No. So very few users have used the feedback mechanism yet. And also the monitoring agencies in general have very little focus on the feedback mechanism. And in some countries, we also see that the public sector bodies either don't use the feedback mechanism or don't really know how to use them in a good way. So this, I think, is really where we have real room for improvement, and something that shouldn't be very difficult, at least not from a technical perspective in the public sector bodies, and that this could really be improved. And again, I personally believe that the whole startup of the enforcement of the directive and the monitoring and everything has taken a lot of focus and a lot of resources. So I really believe that what some of the member states have also told us is that feedback is important, yes, but we needed to start somewhere, and now we are kind of moving ahead. And also going back to the training needed, that's also part of the directive, of the requirements of the member states, that they are supposed to facilitate training and awareness and so on. And we can see a clear connection with the ones that have been providing training, that they also get a better result, and they get more awareness and so on. So I think that is kind of, it's also part of the process to make sure that training happens and that it brings results and so on. So we would like to know a little bit more about the feedback, because we think it's important with the feedback and that the feedback mechanism could be potentially used in a better way. So let's see if I can start this. If Eva, if you can please share the link to the Mentimeter. Thank you. So now you can be really creative and write whatever you like. How can we increase feedback from end users? What is kind of the key here? How do we make sure that the end users start using the feedback mechanism? Easy to find reporting. Yes, that's good. And you have the possibility to add more than one example here, if you like. So if you follow the link in the that Eva has posted in the chat, you can use the Mentimeter to just add your own suggestions, and you have, I think, 10 possibilities. So, and let's see what people say. One-click feedback, that is good. And I guess that is an app for feedback. A universal collector of feedback, that is actually done, not universal, but some member states try to centralize this. So that is happening, at least a little bit. Should be made easy, of course. Yes, and now we also get things in the chat, so that's we have them two places. That becomes difficult to read, but interactive meetings. Okay, so really talking to users, I guess, and making sure that they can provide feedback, more of a co-creation process. and to encourage end users. Yes, I believe that is also important, and also not only encourage, but also kind of empower the users, because what we find is that end users say, I don't know if this is me doing a mistake, or if it's my assistive technology, or if this is covered by the, I encounter some kind of accessibility problem, but I'm not sure it's something I can give feedback on. So I think really encouraging and empowering the users, I think motivating the users is really important. So. And they need to be accessible. The feedback needs to be accessible for users, of course. To involve media, that is interesting. And feedback the feedback. And a standardized mechanism. So that comes back several times. Something universal or something that it's the same, looks similar. Yes, that would of course facilitate for users to provide feedback. So Donald Rice asks, who do you mean by we? I mean we, society, we, humanity. Yes, comments, Einars, Danilo, something? People are still providing things here, but.
We've lost you there for a second, but now you were back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems like a standardized mechanism is winning here.
Yeah, yes, we couldn't hear, but yes. You summarized very well what our findings were in the study, so that unfortunately it is not very used, and data are a bit patchy, so it took some time to collecting them as requested. Definitely some time, and here you can see quite a lot of ideas, and yes, as you said, standardized mechanism seems something that is the most popular one for this audience. There are some challenges that might be linked to this standardized mechanism, but I don't know. I'm leaving the floor to Einars. He might give some more insightful.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of good ideas, and obviously we can see the people who are close to the process or involved, creating this word cloud and reading the chat. But at the end of the day, I think when we started the review process and had a couple of events online, how do we get back to the people so that they know they have rights under the directive? I think that's the first thing. So it goes back to the awareness raising, but and reading the anecdote, when you want to complain or send the feedback and the actual form is inaccessible, that doesn't prevent you, doesn't take away the rights that you have under the EU law. You can call them, you can write an email, so everything should work. But sort of, and then it becomes for the public sector's bodies, it's a user experience. Do you want your citizens to be involved? It kind of, we presumed in the past that sort of this will be, everybody will listen what the citizens say. Not always the case. So the law has to come in and help this process. And I think this review really sheds light on this. What was probably taught as one of the sort of key building blocks on the directive, having users be involved throughout, constant feedback on the website, on the mobile app. It seems it's not working as expected to the fullness of it, so to say. And I think the reasons, we will also have a crystal clear idea, where are the stumbling blocks, and probably it's a combination of all of those to make it easy to give feedback, but also that everyone knows that you can give a feedback. It took a while, I saw there was a chat on the GDPR a while ago. It's similar, it took a while for everything to settle down. Everybody knows it's, you can't have a conference or an email without a privacy statement. I hope it will soon come that you can't have a website or an app without an accessibility statement,
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think really when we talk to end users, it's really clear that many of them do not know their rights and do not know how to do this, or do not trust their own technical capabilities to do it. So I think I really think motivation and so on would increase this. But also I think this anecdotal that it doesn't work, this can also be before the directive or after the directive entered into force. But I really understand that if you have tried to say something and either you got a very kind of bad response or no response at all, I would also kind of give up or just, you know, it's really boring to talk or try to provide something and you don't get any good response. But I do think this is key, that we kind of solve this or find the key to it. So I really hope that we can, that we, society, humanity, anyone can make sure that we together can try to solve this and make sure that end users also do provide feedback, because we also do see that some public sector bodies who wants to make sure that their websites are accessible, they do not know. And there is also still like a misunderstanding or a myth that as long as nobody complains, then everything is fine. So I do think it's extremely important. And with this, I don't mean to put the responsibility on the end users. It's still the public sector body has the responsibility for this, but the end users can really help. And it could be with constructive feedback, this can be such a good circle of support and so on. So we just have one last thing, and that is the user involvement. So user involvement in the directive is on several levels. And here we have focused on the testing part because it's the monitoring that we have been looking into. And when we see how the member states are involving users in the testing or the monitoring, we have 5 member states that clearly defines that they do user testing with, not with experts, but with sort of real users, the man in the street kind of user testing, so that it also becomes a little bit more of usability or actual use of things and not only the technical testing parts. And 19 of the monitoring agencies say that they test with screen readers. So, and that is sometimes a little unclear if it's actually screen reader users who are doing the testing. I think the majority of those are experts that use screen readers as an additional piece of their testing in the monitoring, but still that is closer to the end user. And of course, some of them have a combination of both things. And then we only have 4 member states that do testing with other assistive technology. And I think this is also important because it goes back to what user groups are really covered in when we do when monitoring agencies do monitoring. So there is a bias towards screen readers here, and there's also, in my view, too few monitoring agencies that actually includes users in their testing and in the monitoring, because standards are extremely important. Technical testing can do a lot, but if you really want to know how the website or app is handled by users, then you also need to do user testing to really understand this. And that is, after all, what this is about, that the end users are going to use the actual interfaces. So just a slight repetition, because this is also what we have seen is not always completely known to everyone, and because we also have an audience here who may not be super familiar with the requirements at the European soil. The user needs of the EN 301/549 that are defined to be in scope of the Web Accessibility Directive are users without vision, users with limited vision, users without perception of color, users without hearing, users with limited hearing, users without vocal capacity, and usage with limited manipulation or strength, and the need to minimize photosensitive seizure triggers, and usage with limited cognition. So those are the user needs groups that should be covered by the monitoring. And we can see in the way this is done, because of testing tools not covering all of them or covering them in different ways, and also the lack of users involved, that there is a risk for not all user needs being taken into account when the monitoring is being done, and that is potentially also a spillover that the work done in accessibility may not be covered in the way that we are hoping for. So I think this is the last poll we have, or the word cloud we have. Try to see if I can pull this up. If Eva can please, yeah. How can we make sure that all user needs are covered in monitoring, and not only in monitoring, but of course in the actual accessibility work that is done by public sector authorities? So Eva has posted a new link to Mentimeter in the chat. So if you have any ideas, and again, when I say we here, I mean anyone, any stakeholder, public sector, private sector, research, standardization, monitoring agencies, the Commission, you and I, anyone, private persons, individuals, how can we as society make sure that all user needs are covered? And of course, the first one is involve those users. It's a perfect response, I think. So many good ideas here. Showcase good practices. That is definitely a good idea, and that is happening. There is a group where the monitoring agencies and the Commission are meeting regularly to share best practices, and the monitoring agencies, or the member states rather, are sharing what they think works well. And I think that is also a very good kind of tool to make sure that we learn from each other, or that the monitoring agencies learn from each other and trying to provide better and better services for the end users, and also making sure that the monitoring works in as well as it can. So more research seems to be needed also. And incentives, that's also interesting, but really many interesting ideas coming in here. Testing, be more open, user involvement from day one, and user involvement in different ways comes back all the time. And I saw, now I can't find it again, but I think somebody wrote hire them, which is of course should be the case. We do see that I mean, at the same time as there seem to be a lack of expertise, we also see many people with disabilities without work. So if we could kind of combine those two, that would be, I think, brilliant. So more people, if they, I mean, the end users who would like to work with accessibility testing, that would be, I think, an easy win for everyone. So loads of interesting things here, but showcase good practices is one of the big ones. Einar, Danilo, any thoughts on this? How we can make sure that all user needs are covered?
Einar, I think this is more for you. What I say that is important is that one of the criteria that we have been looking at, and the European Commission usually looks at in evaluations, is effectiveness. And of course, the ability to cover all user needs is really affecting the effectiveness of the directive. So it is important to make sure that all user needs are well covered. So
I would mention that I saw Estonia, I think other countries are having national accessibility awards, and maybe you've heard this Accessible City Award. It's really European-wide, I think this year Luxembourg was one of the in top 3, if not winning. Barcelona, Anyway, long story short, to read, go out there with awareness and reach larger people and sort of get the feedback, get them involved as well. Those are great ideas. They take a bit of organization. Accessibility award for websites and mobile apps. Sort of a Eurovision type of celebration certainly helps and take away a little bit the stigma. The law requires it. Oh, we have to do it because the law requires. No, it's for the users. It's something that benefits you in short term and long term. There are a lot of soft measures around that. And I would like, the commission, we can say, we cannot impose, you have to do an accessibility award, but we'd like to, see municipalities, cities, or whole countries go and do something. I think there's a fantastic phrase in the directive, not to hamper innovation. And a lot of things are possible, but how do we get to the user? That's probably $1 million question to everyone, with cognitive disabilities and neurodiverse. So yeah, we know the classics, the screen readers, as was mentioned, the hearing aids and everything, but I think the whole world tries to solve this question here, covering every possible situation.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. We just have to a couple of slides left. So before we go to the questions and answers, which I really like to have time for as well. So we have a little bit of conclusions, and I know we are not supposed to call these recommendations because that shouldn't be part of this study, but I think there are recommendations anyway. So, and these are just a couple of examples, but really to make this easier, the whole exercise of monitoring, I think really to have a common template would be really beneficial for the monitoring agencies of all the member states, of course, but also for the Commission to understand what is happening in the different member states, and also for any consultant or end user organizations that would like to compare and understand what is happening in different parts of Europe. So just to have a template would be a really good step forward. Also in the implementation acts, making sure that the user needs and the requirements and the compliance status and those kind of details maybe that we have found where there are gaps or differences, that these are either better explained or better enforced or refined in a sense. I think that is also something that we can see that it would benefit the directive and also the enforcement of this if that could be worked on in the future. And then, of course, what we really see this the training exercise, so that don't only monitor things, but also support. And I saw that was also a discussion in the chat. Of course, monitoring as such may not be very useful, even though we have evidence that the public sector bodies are happy about the monitoring. But I personally really think that it's when you have the monitoring result and then you kind of guide the public sector body, you hold their hand and tell them how they should do things. That is when remediation starts and improvement is really going on, because who is helped by just getting a paper where it says that everything is bad? That doesn't really help anyone. So of course it's that kind of a solution-based monitoring, I think is really important, and training and awareness is really, and support is really key to this. And as a one way of doing this, also certification of experts may be one way forward, and that has also been asked for by some of the member states. So that was really just the highlights of this, and let's move to the questions. And we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I know we also have some in the chat. So we have one from Donald Rice. So I don't know if you, I think this is for Einars. Does this mean that no changes to the directive or the implementing decisions are likely to be made?
Yeah, thanks Donald and Susanna for, I think, so this question was when I did talk about the contents and sort of the format of the evaluation report. What is a staff working document? So I'll try to be short, but basically nothing is forever. There is no decision at this time either way, do the changes or don't do nothing. But for sure, we can say nothing's going to happen on the 24th of June, or the day after. The context is relatively new legislation we have, since 2019 for websites and 2021 for mobile apps. So it's 3 years for websites, 1 year for mobile apps. And during the course of last year, we've heard when we updated the harmonized European standard, member states were also sort of worried, they need time to change their entire workflows and procedures. But I'm not saying sort of one way or other one. What we have seen in this review is that guidelines or the implementing acts are much more likely to be changed or updated, especially regarding monitoring and reporting, to be the more readable, user-friendly, compatible. And but as to which way we're going to go and who will decide on that, that will be with the involvement of all the member states. So Donald knows that for everyone else in this group, the Commission works together with member state representatives from the sector, the so-called Web Accessibility Expert Group. So should anything happen, I think it will be in consultation with member states. Yeah, I think that's...
So, yes, thank you. And from Germany, Mike Wald is asking, stating surely universities are saying that they cannot afford providing 100% accurate captions for recorded lectures. And I believe that is true, that universities say this. And me personally, as an accessibility expert, yes, I can agree with that. That is, I can confirm universities do say that. And also many other public sector bodies claim different things that has to do with money. But what I'm reporting here is the results of this study, and really costs has not been one of the big issues presented by the monitoring agencies as such. And I do not think that the majority of the monitoring agencies actually know what each of the university in their country think about this. I mean, it's more anecdotal evidence, or they have been discussing it informally. So when they do the actual reporting, that is not part of the puzzle. But I personally think that you're absolutely right. There are not only universities, but also other types of institutions that do claim to have that, resources is a problem and part of a challenge of this. So I don't know, Einars, if you want to comment on that. I think you also have some interaction with different stakeholders on this.
Yeah, no, I just agree with that comment. I have not much to say. There is a live video. Let's say if you have a live lecture, it's excluded from the scope. Pre-recorded video is included. So if you are a university, which is a public sector body, you would have to make your recorded lectures accessible over time. Yes, that's the law. It says, how do you technically achieve that in all the languages, or in the languages of your country? You have maybe better quality for English or French, German. I'm not sure about the smaller European languages, especially the automatic tools. It is a challenge for sure. Yeah.
So we have a question here from Jakob saying, to your knowledge, have actual penalties been already carried out in regard to the directive? So
yeah, sure. No, no. We looked at this in particular a while ago. We looked up, tried to find this information in the reports as well. No, but we know a case from Norway, which is an active country. They have also accessibility laws closely modeled to the directive, although the directive is not technically yet transposed in there. Anyway, the story was that they have a penalty foreseen for breaches of accessibility requirements, and the threat of penalty actually helped them solve a case with an airline. It works, but the fine was never applied, so we don't have an actual use case in the 3 years with the fine being applied. Yeah.
So we'll have to come back to that when we have more information and that has actually happened. So let's meet again and talk about that. So another question from Donald Rice, Ireland. Why do you think member states have not monitored against the EN? Is it because there is so little awareness of the EN and how it differs to WCAG in the market? And also Bart Siemens says that it's currently impossible to audit against the EN because of the lack of documentation and so on. And also that the EN is not translated into other European languages than English. So this is kind of a concept that we have also discussed with the member states in the WADEX group. So I don't know if you want to say something about that, Einars.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a question for the member states, but I think the collective answer through various channels, including the reports, is that the tools are built around WCAG. Indeed, not everyone is aware of the harmonized European standard. I think the mentions, the reasons were also covered by Susanna mentioned during her presentation. But could be also the miscalculation of the monitoring efforts. So the resources were not enough. So when the member states actually had to do the reporting, that they didn't have enough resources to cover all the criteria in the harmonized standard. So what we've learned as well when we asked the member states in a poll, they said, was it hard? Yes. Did they have, they run out of time and maybe resources, but they felt much more and better prepared for the next time, which is 2024. So certainly be curious to see how does this shift and change in the next reporting round. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And to Bart Simmons' question about who will develop more guidance. So the guidance claimed to be lacking right now. And of course, there is a lot less how to meet documentation in the EN than it is for the WCAG. And who will develop this guidance and when will we get it? And then the question of translation. And the translation issue is really, this is kind of up to the member states and the standardization bodies in the member states. And also the guidance piece is, I believe, Einars can confirm or deny this, but I mean, it is not the Commission's job really, even if one could think it should be, but it's really up to the standardization. That's kind of how the process here, the methodology works. So to anyone, I said this to the member states in the WADEX group as well, if anyone thinks that the EN is bad or could be improved or that we lack some guidance material, then please be engaged in the standardization organizations and support this, because there are still a lot of, it's less people engaged in the EN development than is in the W3C standards. So the more experts are online and the more involved in this, the better the standard will be. And of course, the more resources there will be to actually provide guidance material and so on. So I think welcome and join the work of standardization, and I'm sure we can do much better. Standards are always compromises, so they're definitely not perfect. I'm absolutely aware of that. So we have a lot of questions. What do we pick? Jacob has another question. Will the currently missing sectors such as education be added to the directive? That's a very specific question for Einars, I think, but maybe hard to answer.
I can't say, I can't commit, I can't sort of promise either way. I think we have to sort of, what the Commission at least is looking at, and the legislature, so we're talking about the people of Europe at Parliament and the Council, they will be, then deciding in the context as well, sort of what is the package of accessibility in EU? We have the Web Accessibility Directive, and then we have the upcoming European Accessibility Act, and we have the procurement and a couple of other sort of, and on top of all of that, we have the convention. Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities. We know that there are member states that have included wider group of subjects in their national laws than the directive requires. So this is always possible also from now on. Any member state that is now working on transposition for the Accessibility Act, they could do so if the national parliament wants. I would say, stay tuned for the news, but I'm not gonna sort of take a commitment now before mid-June. So what the Commission is thinking. So it's above my pay grade, I would say.
And it's also a negotiation process, I guess, with the member states, and it's a long process. So Luis Fernandez is asking why the European Commission does not require accessibility requirements or consider it a merit in EU-funded projects like Erasmus and Horizon and so on.
Yeah. It actually does. It actually does. The standard framework contract clauses, they have a requirement on accessibility, but it's usually sort of depending on the call, and it's really, you know, if you have a call in sort of what do you call the blue sky thinking and very innovative projects, it's really the services that are buying or making a tender, you know, they decide, you know, is accessibility a key component. You know, it's sort of when we talk about the projects, EU-funded projects, it's sort of almost like a procurement. So it's not the black and white, sort of, it's not always there. Not all deliverables always are to be used in a way that you would need an accessibility being met. But for reporting and publishing and sort of everything that's textual, there is an actual clause in the contracts. Question is, are they being followed up, you know, enforced by the project officers or by the companies? You know, are they upfront as well saying, hey, here is our deliverable and it's accessible, by the way. So I think this is also a question of application and practice.
Yeah, so the questions around standards and the need for more supporting material and so on is kind of recurring in. So I reading them, and I think we kind of touched upon it before. So now we have the last question I think we can do is from Finland, Eetu Komsi. Sorry for the pronunciation. My Finnish is still not good. How much problems come from the fact that the legislation, which started in 2012, hasn't kept up with the ICT development and utilization, for example, cloud services, VR, AR, video conferences, whiteboard tools, and such things? So any comments on that, Einars?
Yeah.
Technically.
Thanks, Eetu. So VR and XR, it's really, the new technologies are part of the new Digital Europe program package. You know, the Commission, together with member states, they want to invest in these. While technology develops, they didn't think about this in 2012, that's for sure. And I think we've had a couple of exchanges with Eetu, sort of seeing and thinking, you know, where does it leave us now with the directive? And if you make a virtual visit to an institute, you know, to a library or a museum. So directive actually mentions sort of websites and mobile apps. It doesn't mention any other products or technologies, but we know that many member states don't talk about websites and mobile apps anymore. They talk about digital content or digital tools. There's nothing that in EU law prevents member states sort of being in the leadership on this, like it was in 2012 that member states in some regions of Europe had accessibility laws. I think that was actually the first try to say, let's come together and make a common rules for everyone. So definitely, I think as we go more digital and with e-learning and virtual realities, that certainly there's a couple of research projects in the pipeline or that we know will happen, not from our unit, but from the Commission in general. And member states as well, with their regional funding, are trying to do something about it. So I think it's a bit premature to talk what the law will say about these technologies, but the markets are moving.
Yeah, definitely. So it's 3 o'clock, so we need to wrap up and say goodbye. But thank you very much to all of you who has participating in this. And we do have more questions, and we do have a lot of comments in the chat, and we will read all of them and take those into account, of course, when we finalize this study. Thank you very much for Einars for joining us today and providing all the responses and comments and so on, and also answering to kind of impossible questions. That's very nice. And thank you, Danilo, for presenting and being with us today. And a special thanks, as always, to our interpreters, Lisa and Dennis, and to my colleagues. And excuse me for not having a perfect internet connection today, but I am actually on holiday. So that may also be important for for the world, I think. So thank you, everyone. Stay tuned for when the Commission publishes the report. Keep up the good work and make sure to enjoy your weekend and make sure it's also accessible for as many as possible. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And thank you to the interpreters.